All right, good evening. Daf Yomi continues. Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, 11 lines from the bottom. Amar Reish Lakish says, No Sein Tam Lifgam She'amru. When we've been talking about this discussion, if you've got a flavor that's not good, that is not kosher, so it isn't going to invalidate the mixture that it gets mixed in with. Right, so if you've got we had, for example, the yayin nesach that potentially a little drop of flavor gets onto some other kind of permissible food. So we discussed that if it's no sein tam lefgam, if it gives a negative flavor, it's not going to prohibit it. So Reish Lakish says this idea of no sein tam lefgam she'amru lo sheyomru kedera zu chasera melech yasera melech chasera tavlin yasera tavlin. When we say no sein tam lefgam, the idea that something imparts a bad flavor, we're not saying that the cooked mixture has a bad flavor and therefore you could mix prohibited items in it. So, for example, if I've got a kugel and I don't put any salt in it, or I put way too much pepper, if I put too much or too little salt or too much spices or too little spices, that doesn't mean that now I can take some treif, some other ingredient, mix it in and say, well, it's okay now because the whole thing tastes bad. That doesn't work that way. Ella kol she'ein chasera klum ve'eina ne'achelas mipnei zeh. It has to be no sein tam lefgam is permissible. That means when there's nothing else wrong with the dish, and this prohibited flavor actually hurts the cooked food, that's what we mean. Okay, that's number one.
But it's not like a subjective.
Not subjective. So that's you can't.
It'd be like, oh, I don't like this.
Correct. And so this is where it does get a little bit fuzzy. We're gonna have some objective characteristics of what negative spoiled type foods are on the next page. But yeah, if you just don't like it, right? If I'm not a big fan of this flavor, and clam juice gets mixed in with my, and nobody likes that, right? That isn't the same thing, right? Veka de Amri, and there are those who say, Amar Reish Lakish says, no sein tam lefgam she'amru in omrim kedera zu chasera melech yasera melech chasera tavlin yasera tavlin ela hashta miha ha pagma. Says that what we have to be able to say on this side is that we can't suggest that it's prohibited. Let's say I've got a negative flavor that it gets mixed into this cooked item. Well, I can fix it, right? I can put a nice sauce on it and make the whole thing taste acceptable. So therefore, it's no longer a bad flavor. No. We take a look inherently at this item that's getting added that's not kosher. If the item that's getting added in that's not kosher is inherently a negative flavor, that's tam lefgam and it's permissible, right? We can't say, well, since I can fix it, so therefore it's going to be prohibited anyway. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so that's why no sein tam lefgam on both sides of Reish Lakish. He says that it has to be no sein tam lefgam is mutter, but it is specifically where the cause of the negative flavor is the prohibited item itself, not where the negative flavor comes from some other thing. And it has to be that it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant whether you could fix it, right? Where you can say, well, I can add some more lemon juice and this whole thing will taste just fine. No, can't do that. Once it's no sein tam lefgam, it's permissible. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Even if you can make it better. Too.
Even if you can make it better by adding other ingredients.
But if it is mixed with something else that makes it worse, but the tam of the other one would make it better without
that, and that's again that's also right. No, that's not no sein tam lefgam. That's Reish Lakish. That's the 2 points Reish Lakish makes. Amar Rabbi Yovel, Rabbi Yovel says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol shetamo umamasho aser alav. Aser is the word lokin is. Lokin alav. So he says what happens is that we shouldn't mix up, that we were talking about no sein tam lefgam. You've got a flavor that's bad mixed in. If you've got the actual prohibited item mixed into the food, right? You still have a problem, right? If you've got nevela, all this time that we've been talking about is you cooked non-kosher meat in this pot. Now the pot is not kosher. Now we're wondering, can you cook kosher in this non-kosher pot? Is that going to invalidate? Is that going to make the meat treif? That's what we've been talking about. But let's say I have a pot of stew and I drop non-kosher meat into that. That piece of meat that's still in that pot, that's still usher, right? That doesn't disappear. And that it's one thing. All the times that we discuss it, you have to take that. You have to take. Well, you need to be able, right? You have to be able to completely nullify that piece. You have to be able to take that prohibited item out, right? If you eat that prohibited piece of nevela, right? You can't make, because now I've got a piece of chunk of nevela. Well, I go in and I take a scoop and I eat the kazayas of nevela. I'm still getting malchus.
Even if it's batal b'shishim in the stew.
So if it is still be'ain, if it's still present,
Right.
it's still an issue. Right? Because then it's not nullified, it's not mixed in, right? You have to have a mixture such that the prohibited item is not visible and recognizable. That's correct. V'zehu kazayis b'chdei achilas pras. And this it has to be that you eat a kazayis b'chdei achilas pras, meaning that you have to eat a kazayis of the prohibited item in the regular time it would take to eat half a loaf of bread, right? When we eat our matzah, our mitzvah, right? We have to eat that within 3 to 9 minutes or whatever it is. Same thing, when you're going to have in order to violate a prohibition of a kazayis, you also have to eat it within a certain amount of time. If you take like little nibbles, right? That's why we say that if somebody is having trouble fasting, so then they could have a less than a shear, less than a kazayis every 10 minutes or so, right? That's going to be only rabbinically prohibited, not dorais prohibited. And so therefore, if somebody's sick or something like that, they can do that. So this too also, right? If you have if this person has got this piece of meat that gets dropped in and it's spread throughout this dish, now you've got this pot of stew and it takes you 20 minutes to eat it, but you've only got a kazayas of the non-kosher in it. So then you're not eating a kazayas of the non-kosher within the prohibited amount of time. Okay. Now, ta'amo velo mamasho aser ve'ein lo kanolav. Now, what we've been discussing, we're talking about if the flavor, and we're talking about a positive flavor that gets mixed into the pot, but the item is no longer present, right? The item is not there, so then it's prohibited, but you don't get malchus for it. So this question of whether no saying tam, when something gives flavor to it, but the item is not in existence, what's the nature of this prohibition? So Rashi seems to imply that this seems to show that this is a rabbinic prohibition, right?
Say it again. If
the actual prohibited item is no longer existent, right? You drop the item in and it dissolves, or you took it and you removed it, right? So then now it's batal, right? Now it's a matter of batal, and it's prohibited, right? Well, if it's not batal, it's not batal, right? If it has a positive taste, let's say it's not batal and it gives a positive taste, so then it's prohibited, but it's you don't get malchus for it, right? You don't get malchus for it. Because the tam, nosein tam, even if nosein tam for positive, is only prohibited me d'Rabbanan according to Rashi. This big long Tosfos suggests not so, right?
Tosfos taste better or something.
Yes,
interesting, because then dishes. That's according to not according to Tosfos, but that would be gazer.
No, well, even less, because most dishes are nosein tam with gam. Right? So this is the question. You go ask your rabbi and say, well, I made macaroni and cheese in my fleshik pot. First question the rabbi is going to ask is, was the pot clean? Was the pot used in the last 24 hours? Right? If the pot is not used in the last 24 hours, the pot is clean, the food in the pot is still going to be kosher. Right? Because you can't do that lechatchila. But b'diavad, it's okay. That's what our Gemara tells us.
Meat in a dairy pot.
If you cook meat in a dairy pot that wasn't used since yesterday and it was all clean, so then the food inside the pot is going to be permissible.
But the pot itself.
But the pot is now treif. You got to kosher that pot, right? You've got a treif pot, right? Because now it's got absorbed mixed flavors. So now, v'im riba tamlif gam mutter. Now, if the flavor is negative, so then we said it's permissible. V'lema im nosan tamlif gam mutter. So what does that mean? If it's riba, right? If he adds on this prohibited item, but it gives a bad flavor, so it's mutter. Why not just say, if it gives a bad flavor, it's permissible? So hakamash melon. So this comes to tell us, de afagav deika mili achrenaisa de pugma bahadeh, that even if there's some other food in there, some other thing, this supports Reish Lakish's point, even if you put some other thing in there that makes it taste bad as well, as long as the prohibited item itself is making it taste bad, that is permissible. The Hilchos Kalishna Basar Reish Lakish. This supports the statement that we just said, the second version of Reish Lakish, that it does not matter if the dish tastes bad by itself in any event, or I can make that the fact of the matter is that if the flavor of this prohibited item is bad, inherently is bad, so then it's going to be mutter. Okay, so that's.
I guess that's personal taste as well.
That's what we were discussing, whether how much of it winds up being personal taste, right? It is tricky, right? Amar of Kahana, Rav Kahana says, Midivrei kulam nilmad, from the words of all of these different people we've been talking about so far, no sein tam lefgam mutter. If something gives a negative flavor, it's permissible. Okay, that's what we've been talking about for the last day or so. Amar le Abaye, so Abaye says, Bishlam amikulahu lechaye. So he says, okay, so that's fine. I appreciate what you're saying. That is, everybody who we've quoted so far has been saying that giving a negative flavor is permissible. Ella de Reish Lakish, but what about Reish Lakish, right? You can't prove from Reish Lakish whether he thinks that it's permissible or whether he thinks it's prohibited. So Amru Kamar, in his language it says, they said, right? In his language, the no sein tam that they said was permissible is under these circumstances. So that means velei lo svirale, but he himself doesn't hold no sein tam lefgam is mutter, right? He might hold that no sein tam lefgam. There's no proof as to what Reish Lakish holds, whether it's permissible or prohibited. Okay, so now miklal. So that implies that if you're going to tell me the halach is like the opinion that says something gives a negative flavor, it is going to be permissible. That means you've got to find somebody who says that it gives a negative flavor. It's prohibited. So I've got somebody. Somebody does say that. V'hatanya, we learn a brisa. Echad nosein tam lefgam, v'echad nosein tam l'shvach. Aser. Doesn't matter whether the food, the prohibited item, is good tasting or bad tasting. It's prohibited. Div Rabbi Meir. So that's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir has the shita that he himself holds that it is prohibited. Something with a negative flavor is prohibited. Rabbi Shimon says l'shvach is aser. If it's a beneficial flavor, so then it's prohibited. V'lefgam mutter, but if it is a negative flavor, then it's permissible. My time in the Rabbi Meir. So what is Rabbi Meir's source for holding that no sein tam lefgam is still aser? That if it's a negative flavor, it's still prohibited. What's his source for that? So Gamar migiule ovdei kochavim. He learns it from the source of koshering pots in the Torah. The source of koshering pots in the Torah is when we go into Eretz Yisrael. So we're going to find all of the pots and pans and containers of the idol-worshipping nations that leave them behind when we conquer them. So those pots and pans haven't been used in some time when we conquer the land, right? You're presuming that the army comes along, they do a battle, they conquer, the people leave the city, they run away, and they walk in, they say, oh, here's all these pots and pans. Now, everything there really is already no sein tam lefgam. It's been sitting around for a while. Segule ove kochavim lav no sein tam lefgamhu. Every one of those pots that they had, that the Bnei Yisrael, when they conquered Eretz Yisrael, had to kasher, they were all negative flavors. The aser rachman, and the Torah says, it's still prohibited. You better kasher it. So you see that the requirement to kasher a pot is when it's a negative flavor.
This is going to Rabbi Meir, right?
This is going to Rabbi Meir, right? So hachanami. So therefore here too, lo shnot makes no difference whether it's a positive flavor or a negative flavor. You have a non-kosher thing and you've got to kasher it. The idach kid Rav Huna. The other opinion holds like Rav Huna, Brei Rav Chia. Dam Rav Huna, Brei Rav Chia, as Rav Huna, the son of Rav Chia, says, lo asar Torah ele kedei rabasi yoma. The Torah only says that it's prohibited to use to cook in a non-kosher pot that has been used within that day, right? Because within that day, the food is not spoiled and the flavoring is positive. Delo livgamhu, that's when it's not negative. So now the ve'idach kedei bas yoma nami. So the other one says, well, Rabbi Meir, what are you going to do with that, right? Why don't you explain that when Bnei Yisrael came in to Eretz Yisrael, there were koshering pots that were used that day. So efshar delo pagma purta. He says, even if something goes bad in 24 hours, it starts to go bad immediately. So therefore, whenever you have a pot that has been used in the past, some of the flavor is negative. Some of the flavor may be positive, but some of the flavor is negative. So you see that the fact that you have to kosher any pot that has been used in the past, that you have to remove the negative flavor as well. That's how Rabbi Meir looks at it. For Rabbi Shimon, my taima, so Rabbi Shimon doesn't necessarily agree with that. Rabbi Shimon says, no, maybe 24 hours is when it starts to go bad, right? Doesn't necessarily agree with that point. Rabbi Shimon, my taima, what's Rabbi Shimon's rationale? Why does he hold that 24 hours is the rule? Tanya, we learned in a brisa. It says, Lo tochlu kol nevela. You're not allowed to eat any nevela, any non-slaughtered properly meat, right? So, leger asher b'sharecha. You're supposed to give it to that ger toshav that we talked about before. You give it to the ger that is in your area. Kol haru'uya leger kruya nevela. Now, what does that mean? It means to tell me that nevela, the definition of nevela, is something that I can't eat, but it's perfectly edible, and I can give it to my non-Jewish friend, right? I was practicing shchita, and I missed, and now I've got a non-kosher animal. What can I do with it? Well, I can go to my next-door neighbor, who's a non-Jew, my ger toshav next-door neighbor, Shabbos goy, and give it to him. Right. Now, if, however, the nevela is rotten, right? It's gross, it's disgusting, I can't give it to my non-Jewish friend, he wouldn't eat it, then it's not nevela. Okay? So therefore, right? So we're in Samech Chesam and Aleph. She'ein ru'uya leger ein akruya nevela. Right? If it's not able to give to my non-Jewish friend, it's not nevela.
Right.
So that means that spoiled meat is not kosher, right? But you can't say it's kosher. I don't want to say, but a double negative, right?
Spoiled meat is not.
Spoiled meat is not a prohibition of eating not kosher.
Right.
Right? So that's what this means.
Right. That's what Shimon.
That's what Shimon says. Right. So therefore, if I happen to have cooked in flavors of not kosher meat in my pot, and it's 24 hours old, it's not a problem. It's not a not kosher. It's not a non-kosher problem. That's what Shimon holds.
So nevela is considered a rotted meat.
No, nevela is not rotted meat. Rotted meat is not nevela. Rotted meat is when it's perfectly fresh, right? The Purdue chickens, I don't have Purdue here, whatever the non-kosher branded chickens is in the grocery store, that's nevela.
Right.
Right? That's nevela. Perfectly fresh, perfectly edible. Right? If I get, the disgusting deer that got hit on the side of the road,
right,
that's not nevela.
Right.
That's not nevela. That is just gross.
Right.
Right? So that isn't, if that is
that
not,
you could give to your
dog, potentially, if he might eat it. But the definition of nevela is what it's fit for human consumption.
Right. And that we can give to a ger toshav.
That which is fit for human consumption we can give to a ger toshav, correct. Right. But that is also not kosher. So if we have mixed that with our food, that's not kosher.
Right.
But if you mix a piece of old, disgusting, rotted meat with and it gives a negative flavor, then that's negative flavor. And that's where the problem comes in. Okay? So now, the Rabbi Meir will say, Hahu le'me'ute serucha me'ikara. No, that pasuk is to tell me that if it was disgusting from the beginning, meaning it got, it got just killed in a really disgusting way, right? So like, for example, the animal was sick, right? So the animal dies and it's already putrid. So then that's what's not nevela, right? But spoiled meat can still be nevela. That's what Rabbi Meir says.
Right.
For Rabbi Shimon says, no, impossible. Serucha meikara lo tzricha miuta. You don't need a pasuk to tell me that a animal that's diseased isn't nevela, because that's just like dirt, right? It's not even meat. It doesn't even enter into the category of meat. To have spoiled meat, that was meat. Now it's spoiled, so therefore it's not prohibited anymore. That makes sense that the Torah would tell me. To tell me that a animal that's diseased dies, that's not nevela, there's no need for the Torah to tell me that. Afra bi'almahu, that's just regular, that's like dirt, right? They say, don't eat dirt. Of course don't eat dirt, but it's not kosher. Don't eat a diseased animal. Of course don't eat a diseased animal, but it's not that it's not kosher, right? So therefore he doesn't require that pasuk for that. Okay. Now, Amar Ula says, Machlokes shehishbiach ula vasof pegam. Right, when we were discussing before, so this Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, right, according to him, he disagrees with what we've been saying. Up until this point, we've been arguing that Rabbi Meir says nosein tam lifgam, and Rabbi Shimon have an argument about nosein tam lifgam, whether it's permissible, prohibited. Says Ula, he says the argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon about nosein tam lifgam is only where the taste was better, right? And then it got worse. However, if the flavor was bad from the beginning, meaning spoiled meat gives off a bad flavor immediately, even Rabbi Meir agrees that that's permissible, right? That's not even the argument. So he's disagreeing, right? Up until this point, we were saying Rabbi Meir holds that a bad flavor is still permissible, a bad flavor is still prohibited. No, not true. Rabbi Meir agrees a bad flavor is still prohibited. The only time Rabbi Meir says is when you've got a flavor that was originally positive but then goes bad. That's where the argument is.
We don't hold like Rabbi Meir, right?
We do not.
Right.
Eisvei Rav Chaga le'ula. So Rav Chaga asks Ula the following question: if that's true, Yayin shenafel letoch adoshim. Let's say you have wine that falls into our barley. V'chomet shenafel letoch grisin. Or we had vinegar that fell on the beans. Those are the cases we had yesterday. So usr, that's we said. Rabbi Meir says that's prohibited. Rabbi Shimon matir, and Rabbi Shimon says it's permitted. The ha-ha-ha dipgam me'ikarahu upligi, and these are bad flavors, right? You can't have your vinegar pouring all over your cooked beans, and it'll just be bad for the flavor. So therefore, you see that they're still arguing. So Amar Ula says, no, Chaga lo midi yoda maik amri rabbanon. Chaga doesn't understand what we already explained about that case when we talked yesterday about it. Tiyuv to kamosiv. So we already asked a question and we already explained that case differently than that. Hachaba mayaskin, what are we talking about? Kagon shenafel toch grisin tsonanim vehir ticham. So that case that was the argument was where vinegar fell on cold beans and then they got heated up. That's nasa kemishish biach uvasof pagam. The osir, that is the case where they were at the beginning, it was a good flavor because it was on cold. Then they heated up and then it tasted bad. That's where Rabbi Meir says it's osir and Rabbi Shimon says it's mutter in any event. Okay, has to start off good and then turn bad. That's where Rabbi Meir says prohibited, and Rabbi Shimon says permitted. Otherwise, everybody says permitted. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Bepogi me kara machlokas." No, that the argument is even where it is bad in the beginning. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. He tells Ula, no, the argument is even at the beginning. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir are arguing even with the negative flavors at the beginning. Iboiluhu. So we ask the fine question. Bepogi me kara machlokas is the argument when the negative flavor comes out at the beginning. And is what Rabbi Yochanan is suggesting then is that if it was starting off as a positive flavor and then in the end it turns negative, that everybody agrees that's prohibited. Odilma, benzu machlokas, or is it either way, it's an argument, so teku. So we don't know the answer to that, but we do, because we're going to see. That was at the point that Rabbi Yochanan was in his times, but later on, they made it clear and clarified, as we're going to see in the Gemara later on, that it was clear that if it starts off benefit and then turns bad, that in fact that it's permissible, and we'll see that. Amar Rav Amram says, Efshar isa lahod Rabbi Yochanan v'lo tanya le b'mas nisan. So he says, this question Rabbi Yochanan asks is so fundamental, as in, what is it that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon hold about something that starts off positive and turns negative? It's impossible that you can't find that case somewhere in a Mishnah or a Brisa. It just makes no sense that you can't find it anywhere. So therefore, nafak dak v'ashkach. He went out, he searched through all the Brises, and he found it. Is it Tnan? Or we switched it to de Tnan. Yes, we learned it in a Mishnah. It goes like this. Se'or shachulin shenafel etocha isa. Okay, we've got some leavening agent, some se'or, right? The starter or whatever they call that, and it's chulin. It's a regular starter for everyday dough, and it goes and falls into the dough. V'yesh bo kedei lahachmitz, and enough of it falls in to be able to make the dough rise and turn into bread. V'hechmitza. Okay, then the dough becomes chametz, it leavens and rises. Okay. V'yachar kach, after that happens, nafal se'or shel truma. Then comes and they drop their leavening agent that was made from truma, right? I guess a Kohen's house. He's got a leavening agent for truma, and that falls into. Oh, so or shokil kerem, or he might even have, for some reason, a prohibited leavening agent, right? He's got kilayim that you're not supposed to get any benefit from. That falls in. V'yesh bo kedei lahachmitz, and enough of it falls in to be able to make the bread rise. So usr, that is prohibited. Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Shimon says it's permitted. Now, the ha'acha, this circumstance here is de pgam meikarahu, that immediately when this prohibited dough, the truma dough, or the dough that is from the kilayim dough falls in, it's over leavening the bread. The bread was perfectly healthy and fine without it, right? If we hadn't added a second dose of leavening agent, this bread would have rose and you would have had a nice loaf of sourdough. Now comes a second helping of leavening agent. Well, that's going to ruin it, right? That over leavens the bread. It makes it turn sour. That's no good. So therefore, when this prohibited leavening agent falls in, that's creating a pagam from the outset. Immediately it's a pagam. And nevertheless, you see, that's the argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says it's prohibited, and Rabbi Meir says prohibited, and Rabbi Shimon says it's mutter. So you see, they even argue where the prohibited item causes a pagam meikara at the outset. Right? Upligi, they argue. So Amar Reb Zara says no. Shani Isa. Dough is different. You can't look at the second helping of leavening agent that falls into it as a immediate harm to the dough, because what happens is, you're right, you're ruining this loaf of bread, right? The extra leavening agent falls in, and now I've got a ruined loaf of bread. But you know what I do have? I do have much more leavening agent. I could take this bad loaf of bread, this bad dough that I just made, and I can then distribute it and use it to start other dough. So it tastes bad, but actually it's good in the sense that I can use it for a different purpose.
Right.
So you can't take a look. The argument is, you can't take a look, is the extra leavening agent bad for the dough or is it good for the dough?
Mm.
This actually might be good. Right? So therefore, since it is going to be creating other good things, I guess it's a situation where it has a pagam in some ways, but it has a positive in the others. Right? That's why Rabbi Meir says, ultimately you look at it and say it's a positive, not a negative. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's negative because this dough tastes negative, therefore it is permissible.
And
that's what
Rabbi Meir says it's good because you're able to make more and more
of other loaves.
Right.
So therefore, that has nothing to do with the issue about pagam. The issue there is it a pagam or not? Right. Not the issue is whether pagam has to be at the start or not. Okay, so that doesn't prove it. So Tashma, we'll try again. Su'or shel truma v'shel chulin, right? We continue on. You've got starter, that's truma and chulin. Shenaflu letocha isa, both of them fall into the dough. Bazek kedei lachmitz, bazel kedei lachmitz. They fall in at the same time, and each of them has sufficient quantity to cause the dough to rise. Vechimtzu, and they together have now caused the dough to overrise. Usr. So that's what Meir says, prohibited anyway, even though it's gonna ruin it immediately. Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Shimon says it's fine. Nafal shel truma techila. Now, if truma falls in first, divra kol asr. Everyone agrees that's prohibited, right? Because then you've got, for sure, you're causing a positive flavor first, because the truma falls in, and even Rabbi Meir is going to say that's where Rabbi Shimon is going to say prohibited, because then you're causing the dough to rise, and it's perfectly fine. That's prohibited. Nafal shechulin ve'achar kach nafal shel truma. Now, if the chulin goes in first, and then the truma goes in second, oh, shel kilaya karam or kilayim karam, that's aser. That's where Rabbi Meir says prohibited. Rabbi Shimon says mutter. Rabbi Shimon says mutter. That's the case we just quoted, and we said that was because it's possible that it may be leavening other dough. Now, in this circumstance, right, we're saying that it causes the that this is again, do you have a circumstance that it's causing it to be bad immediately, right? Because it was already leavened from the first leavening agent. Now the second leavening agent falls in. It's bad from the beginning. Upligi, and they argue. V'chitema hachanami Reb Zera. Well, it just answers the same answer that we gave last time. Reb Zera's answer, right? Because you can then split it off and give it to other doughs and make it leaven. So Toshma. So the reason why we don't want to say that is because take a look at the end case, Miseifa. Take a look at the end. Hayayin shenafal l'toch adoshim. So if I've got wine that falls into barley, so v'chomet shenafal l'toch grisin, or I've got vinegar that falls into beans, aser, that's prohibited. Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Shimon says permissible. V'ha hachinami dipigami kara. Now, this is also a circumstance, we're presuming they're heated beans, right? That it's a bad thing immediately. The vinegar falls on my hot beans. That's a bad flavor.
We said the opposite. No, we said the opposite before.
Oh,
right.
And before you're going to say what we said before, Hachinami Kiddushani Ula Rabbi Chaga, which Ula told Rabbi Chaga, Keshish Biachul Vasof Pagam. This is the old case. They were cold first, and then we heated them up. So at the beginning they were good, and then they became bad. Right? That's what you were going to say, right? Umi Pligi Keshish Biachul Vasof Pagam. There's no argument. There can't be an argument. Now, from what we're seeing is, what you're suggesting now is that the argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon is where it started good and turned bad.
Right.
Well, now, let's take a look at that. Starts good, turns bad, fine. But we're clearly seeing that there's no argument where it starts good and turns bad, because right before that, in the same brisa, it says, Nafel shel truma techila, if the truma fell in first, which means that the dough started good, divrei hakol aser, everybody agrees that's not acceptable. So that means everyone agrees. Even Rabbi Shimon would agree that if it starts out good and turns bad, it's usher.
Right.
So therefore, there's no argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon where it starts out good and turns bad. Therefore, where is the argument? Only where it starts out bad. El lav shmamina bepgam meikara machlokas. It's clear that the argument has to be where it starts out bad. Shmamina. So that's our conclusion. Right? The argument is where it starts out. So therefore, that answers Rabbi Yochanan's question, right? Is the argument where it starts out bad? Yes. So Rabbi Shimon is going to be lenient in all. Is going to be lenient in all those cases, and Rabbi Meir is going to be prohibited. Is going to say usher in all those cases. Okay, hani tlos above diktani lamali. Now you've got three different stages in that brisa we just quoted. Why do I need all three different stages? Okay, let's start off. Bishlama bava deseifa. Let's start off with the last case. The last case I get. Kamash milan epoge meikara machlokas. That's the case where the last case is where the wine falls into the I keep saying barley, I meant lentils, right? The barley falls into the lentils. Wine falls into the lentils, no barley at all. Wine falls into the lentils, and vinegar falls into the beans. So that's the machlokas. That we need that case. That's to tell me, that's kamashma poge meikara machlokas. That's to tell me that the argument is even if it turns bad immediately, right? That Rabbi Meir and Shimon are going to argue, even if the wine falls on hot beans, and it's going to ruin the vinegar falls in the hot beans, and it's going to ruin the flavor. It is going to be prohibited according to Rabbi Meir, but permitted according to Rabbi Shimon. Okay, mitziasa. Now the middle case, right? Nami. I understand the middle case as well, which is where the truma falls in first, and then afterwards the chulin falls in. Right? That's important. Why? Because divrei hakol aser. That tells me that everyone agrees in that case it's prohibited, right? If it falls in first, that's where even Rabbi Shimon says, hey, it's turning good first, that's prohibited, okay? That's even Rabbi Shimon agrees that's prohibited. Ella, Reisha, Lamali. But the beginning case, the first case, where the truma and the chulin fall together, that they both are arguing, why do I need that case? Uma seifa delo k'meshabech klal asi rabbanon. If you've told me at the end, the last case by the vinegar and the wine, right, that it falls on, it makes no positive benefit to what it falls on at all, you're going to say that the Rabbanan are going to say it's Aser. Reisha de K'mishabeach mi boy. So then, for sure, where it causes some partial goodness to it, for sure that's going to be prohibited, right? If everyone agrees it's prohibited where it causes no goodness, right? So then for sure it's going to be prohibited where it causes some goodness. So Abaye says, Reisha Rabbi Shimon Itzterich. The beginning case is I need it to tell me the extent of which Rabbi Shimon, who says that it's permissible, the extent to which Rabbi Shimon says it's permissible. V'hachikam relay. This is what they said. This is what the V'hachikam relay Rabban on the Rabbi Shimon. This is what the Rabbanan said to Rabbi Shimon. Isa zu re'uya lahachmitz b'shtei sha'os. Okay, so this dough, right, is supposed to be able to rise, right, in 2 hours. Okay, mi garam lo shetachmitz b'sha'ah achas. So what caused it to rise in half the time? So the answer is Isur, the prohibited item. And so therefore you should agree with the Rabbanan are saying to Rabbi Shimon, you should agree with us that that's some kind of an extra benefit that the truma falls in, that it made it to rise faster. So Rabbi Shimon says, Kishbichu shnehem, hishbichu, keshepagmu shnehem pagmu. He says that no, Rabbi Shimon says that when it causes when the two of them mix together, and they cause them to benefit, so it's not the truma itself that caused the benefit, and when it causes a detriment, both of them cause the detriment. So therefore, it's the truma is not going to prohibit it because it didn't cause the benefit itself, right? It didn't cause the benefit itself.
How about if it tasted bad? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that, because you're saying, okay, there's a benefit, but if the first thing to happen before the benefit is it tastes bad, and we said after that, like
if it tastes bad, so if it tastes bad first,
right?
Tastes bad first, then Rabbi Shimon's going to say mutter,
right?
Even if Rabbi Shimon is going to, and Rabbi Shimon's going to even go one step further, even if if it's improved by the prohibited item. If it would have risen and been beneficial without that negative, you can't ascribe all the beneficial flavor to the prohibited item, and it's still permitted.
I mean, it has to be completely.
It has to be completely caused. The prohibited item must be completely caused.
So if it gets
by the prohibited flavor,
right, if it gets better, if it's improved, it's still
right. So that's what we said, right? The Gemara said,
Yafalo. That's
right. Right. So Abai says that this is what they're saying to Rabbi Shimon.
Interesting. And if it has to be on its own, then it makes it worse.
Right. That's what he says.
Do we hold like Rabbi Shimon?
I believe we do hold like Rabbi Shimon. I believe our take a look and see in the back. Let's have some base. I'll tell you right now. Bring all the halachos in the back here. Where are we?
So
here it is.
Even if it benefits it doesn't.
Since it's combined. Since no, it's good. Right, Rabbi Shimon was going to say it sounds like it's permissible. Like Starfin. That's the next thing. Or live a kerm. Olam be'echad. Umasayim. It's starting saying that. Seor shechulin shenafel letocha isa. Isa mechumas b'shenafel letocha seor shel truma o seor shel kalei kerm. V'chein kedera metuveles shenafel letocha tavlin shel truma o shel orla v'shel kalei kerm. Im yesh b'seor kedei lachmetz ilu haisa isa matzah. Ubetavlin kedela taba kedera ilu haisa tfela hare hakol aser. Aim by him kedela letavela hachmetz yalu b'shiuran. That's not what we're dealing with.
That's interesting because even batal, like let's say I poured milk accidentally into a meat dish. If the milk would make the meat taste worse, who cares about batal b'shishim? At that point, it doesn't even matter. It's that it's
milk. Here's the problem: milk and meat is always the one that I'm trying to avoid with.
Right.
The halacha with milk and meat, right? The Rambam says, the Rambam says that all prohibited foods, if you eat them in their normal way, then you've violated the prohibition. But if you eat them in a non-normal way, then there isn't a Torah prohibition. So, for example, if I have a gel cap, right, that has prohibited nevela in it, right? The gel used to be the Tylenol gel caps used to have gelatin in it, right? And so therefore, right, if I'm not eating it normally, but I'm just swallowing it whole. So me deoraisa from a Torah perspective, that may not be prohibited from a Torah perspective as eating a nevela, right? So, however, when it comes to basar b'chalav, not the same case.
Right.
So therefore, nosein tam lifgam actually becomes somewhat questionable in the Rishonim, and I'm avoiding it because I'm confused by the arguments back and forth in the Rishonim about nosein tam lifgam by basar b'chalav, because it sounds like I think it's the Rambam who says, therefore, nosein tam lifgam is still a problem when it comes to basar b'chalav, because since when you eat it, right? Since when you eat it, I was just listening to a shiur with this on the way back and forth from the wedding, right? So if you eat it not in the normal way of eating, right, so then you're in violation of basar b'chalav.
Right.
Similarly, if you eat something that doesn't taste right, that's not the normal way of eating it, it still may be a prohibition of basar b'chalav.
Right, because it's its own separate entity.
Correct.
Its own separate Avodah.
So therefore, basar b'chalav is one. There was a second one that was also, what was the other one that was like that?
Making shiratzim.
What was the other one? Basar b'chalav and kilayim. I want to say it's kilayim because also
we said it earlier in the Gemara. You could even, there's people who hold like about ripping out the plants. If that was like, could you have benefit from the kilayim, or was it just planting that was the problem?
Right. So that was we had discussion whether there was prohibitions of leaving it to grow by itself. That was Rabbi Akiva.
Right.
Okay, this is a good place to stop. We will pick this issue up and discuss this Abai and Rabbi Shimon's perspective. We'll pick up tomorrow.